So good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to the first session of the Digital Food 2022 series. My name is Tiffany Tsui. I'm your moderator of today's session. I'm a global strategist, consultant, and entrepreneur. I focus on sustainability and transformation and bridging East with West. Also on the digital food team is Dick Veerman and Bianca van der Haa. We together developed the concept of digital food series in an effort to connect data, strategy, and technology, and also connect people, ideas, and regions. So after last year's session, we had more than 15 series discussion around the topic of digital food. This year, in 2022, we will focus on use cases. So today is the first one. We would like to address the question we started already last year is how do we create trust among connected players in the agri-food system? How do we define value allocation models for providing data, transforming them, and applying information throughout the entirety of the food chain? So today we have a great speaker, Jacques Wolfert, from senior scientist from Wageningen University. Jacques' main research areas are information management and ICT, system analysis, and sustainable development. So he concerns topics such as Internet of Things, big data, and digital innovation hubs. Over the last few years, Jacques has been involved as lead scientist or coordinator for several large European level projects, including IOF 2020, Smart Agri Hubs, and FI Space. So these are projects that aim to develop use cases at the European level. We're very honored and pleased to learn from Jacques. What have we learned from these use cases, and what does it mean for the future of agri-food transformation? So to start, to understand, also get to learn our participants today, Bianca, let's pull up our first poll question. So the first poll question is a yes and no question. Do you agree or not? Do you agree that digitalization is beneficial to everyone and will truly transform agriculture and increase its sustainability? So you have to one single choice. So Jacques.
Yes.
What do you think? What is your answer to this poll question?
Yeah, it was not a difficult choice. I just said yes. Of course, it will change.
You believe that it's beneficial for everybody?
Yeah. I think in the end it will be, but of course it has to be done in a responsible way. So, I will come back to that also.
Yes. So the key sentence here is in the end. So we have some way to go to get to the end. Yeah. Let's see if our audience today also agree with you. Very good. So people come here for mostly agreeing with this development that in the end is inevitable pathway and it will be beneficial. So Jacques, your presentation today will be sharing your experience at European level. Please go ahead.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for the invite. So in the meantime, I will share my screen. So you see my presentation now? Okay.
Yes.
Okay. Yeah. So we will we'll do it in three parts. So first of all, let me show the outline. I will try to set the scene a little bit and elaborate also on this question: what is digital innovation, or what is the digital transformation of agri-food that we are in and that we are heading to? Then I will basically focus on an integrated innovation approach that we developed through these projects, IOF 2020, basically, and also continuing that in Smart Agri Hubs. And I will also highlight that or explain that with a real use case from France, you will see. And then I will go into how can we create sustainable, structural, digital innovation ecosystems for the future, which I can already tell you is also still a challenge personally for me, for my institute. So I hope we can have a lively discussion on that, and maybe also create some energy with each other and see if we can make some actions out of that together. So first, about this digital transformation of agri-food. So this picture is maybe already quite familiar to you. Probably maybe you are doing it also yourself, that you're scanning your groceries in the shop with your mobile phone. Yeah, do you actually know then where this cheese, this famous Dutch cheese, probably is coming from? And do you also know then how it is produced? What is the ecological footprint of that? So this barcode suggests that there is a lot of information behind that, but there is also then an infrastructure needed for that. And do all the players behind this barcode, all the players in the supply chain, are they willing to share all these data, or do they have to share these data? And in the end, who's paying for all this extra information? You as a consumer, and then who benefits most from it? Is that the farmer, or maybe some other player in between? So these are all questions behind the simple barcode that have to be addressed. So there is a whole world of digitalization and data behind it. So I will show you 4 applications of digital transformation, or 4 applications of data in the agri-food sector, which is decision making in companies or for consumers, for food integrity, for public decision making by public authorities, and for science and technology development. And one of my main messages throughout the whole discussion will be that technological developments come along with all kind of organizational changes. So this is what we see. The whole supply chain from farm to fork is being digitalized through actually this what I call cyber physical management cycle. So there are all kind of smart sensing and monitoring devices being introduced, like you see over here, drones, sensors in the greenhouse, and so on. And they are producing a lot of data that has to be analyzed, and that can be used for planning. And nowadays, everybody is talking also about AI. Well, maybe there are also already some artificial intelligence applications available in agriculture, but I think it's still in a very early stage. The same holds also for smart control. So all kind of smart devices that are automatically harvesting or spraying, or all kind of things like that. And I think it's also very important that this cycle is also closed. I always say, well, you can monitor at the square meter, but then if you don't have the models and the algorithms to analyze it at a square meter, and you don't have the equipment to operate at this square meter, then it doesn't work. So you have to close this whole cyber physical management cycle to make it valuable for decision making in the end. And it's not only decision making at the farm, but referring to the first picture, it's also for decision making for consumers in the end. The second application of data would be for food integrity. So this is addressing questions, so where does my food come from? Or how is it produced? How many pesticides were, for example, applied at this food? Or what age was a pig or a pork slaughtered? But also here, infrastructure is very important in the back. That has also to do with standardization, and I think in the previous session this was already discussed quite enough. But in this example, if you have 2 partners or 2 parties in the supply chain, they are both using different names for the same pesticide, then you have a problem in your information exchange. And also here, the question is, are you willing to share these data for the sake of food integrity? Or if you have to do that, then how do you know that nobody's tampering with the data? So there might be also fraud, and we know examples of that. And also here again, the question is, if we want this, that data is used for food integrity, who's paying for that? And if you are not able to join this, or you don't want to invest, or you cannot invest in all these smart equipment that I showed also in the previous slide, maybe are you then not able to participate in the supply chain anymore, or yeah, can you still be included? These kind of questions also raise. The third application of data can be for public policies. So it can be about food safety, environmental policy, or public health. And maybe there are also other areas. And until now, you see that most governments have their own information systems, their own censuses through which they collect data. And usually these are quite heavy and big information systems that are lagging behind. Usually only after a year they have all the information available. So it would be very nice, of course, if they could also tap into these data. But of course, this is also risky from the private point of view, because yeah, what are the government? What is the government? What do they do with the data? For what kind of purposes? And am I also punished in the end? Maybe we have also examples that companies were punished for fraud, and in the end it was not true. But also in a more positive way, if I show that I'm more producing more eco-friendly, am I also rewarded for that? So this is something about data for public policy that is also already happening, but also in an early stage still, I think. And then the final application area for data through this digital transformation is for science and technology. And so there are all kind of new technologies. I already mentioned artificial intelligence, blockchain, everybody was talking about, maybe it's still, I think, relevant. Internet of Things, and I will show some examples of that, and big data in general. And actually, these are also the main drivers for this whole digital transformation. But at the same time, their development is also depending on the data that is being produced in reality, in practice. Because this is a picture showing how research was done and is still done. So usually in some kind of controlled environment, a greenhouse or a laboratory, where you have a very controlled experiment that you carry out, and then you derive data from that, and you are going to do statistics on it and try to derive knowledge. And this is still, I think, mainstream science. But nowadays, with modern data science, we are also able to use these data from practice. And I think it's happening increasingly. But then there are also questions. Do private companies want to share data with scientists? Luckily, we have already some good examples, but also there, it's only in the beginning, I think, and there are also a lot of bottlenecks that have to be solved. And also, for example, that then it might be necessary that you organize yourself as a sector or as a branch. So coming to the conclusion of this first part, I showed that data can be used for different purposes. First of all, decision-making for businesses and consumers, for food integrity, where does my food come from, how is it produced, for public policies and potential, and also for science and technology, and there is this mutual relationship. And these are all coming together around the same data in the end. So there is a challenge. How can we combine all these different applications or objectives around the same data? And so the innovation challenge for digital innovation I would like to formulate is that how can we create data-driven solutions that use the potential of these data, but at the same time also address the grand challenges of sustainable food production. And I think with all the questions I raised, I made clear, and I will probably make it more clearer in the rest of the presentation, but you must address technical and organizational issues at the same time. Talking about data infrastructure, standardization, and data analytics, technical, but also at the same time look at the business model that is behind it, and also governance issues and even ethics when it concerns data sharing. So that was my first part, Tiffany.
Yeah, thanks, Shark. So in your last sheets, you mentioned there four, let's say, the driver cases: that public policy, consumer, technology, and also company for efficiency themselves. But the agri-food sector is lagging behind other sectors in terms of digital technology application, right? So it's like compared to the more consumer end, especially, let's say on the farm end, that's especially lagging. And then even though there's strong enough reasons, but these values you mentioned in terms of transparency of public policy making, some of these values are contradictory, right? So the question is, if you believe, or we all believe, that in the coming years there will be, we should witness major digital transformation in agri-food sector, but which factor will be the critical one to push this development, let's say, over the tipping the scale? So let's ask our audience, what do you think? What would be the major, most critical factor driving the transformation of the sector? So you have 4 choices, you can only choose one. Is it the new, more and more stringent or constantly now released EU policy directives on carbon emissions, on disclosure, and also on European level kind of standard setting? Is that going to be driving ultimately the disruptive development? Or is it the consumer demand, which drives a more bottom-up approach, which gives rise to more the startups with venture capital investment, for example, or disruptive business models? Or is it technology development driven by multinational big techs for the reason of technology? So it's not necessarily for agri-food only, but then because of the technology development, but also for kind of a race to internationally? Or is it the farmers themselves to try to secure a fair position in the supply chain? So give your answer. Shark, what do you think about if you have to choose one, you have listed 4 applications. What to you is the most, let's say, the determined one in the coming years, that can make, let's say, speed up things?
Yeah, I think that's the good question, the most determining one, because I think all 4 of them, and maybe there you can also mention other factors, but yeah, I think in the end, the most determining one will be just the technology developments. As I indicated, and I will emphasize that more and more in this hour, I think that we also have to organize it in the right way. But I think if you also look at other developments, it has always been the new technology that's being introduced. And in the beginning, there are only a few people that are adopting it. But gradually, I think all of these technologies will be adopted in the end, also in the agri-food sector. So I still remember, it seems long ago, but it is not so long ago, but that the GPS was introduced into farming, and they were put in the tractors. And I still remember that some farmers said, well, I will never going to use that because I know how to plow in the right way my field, so I don't need that. But yeah, well, if you look at it now, it's more or less standard. And I don't hear any complaints anymore, and most of them have adopted it. And maybe this is a very simple example. It's if you talk about these, let's say, these AI applications, which is integrating a lot of other technologies, will be more difficult. But in the end, yeah, somehow technology will go through in a kind of autonomous process, so to say. But the question is what you started in the beginning with, that indeed, we could say that the developments are going too slow. And then it's also a matter of policies at the national level, or the European level, or at other continent level. Do you want to accelerate it? And then there can be good reasons for that, to do that. And I see opportunities for that, how you can accelerate it.
Thanks. So I think we can also, Bianca, let's see what our audience think about responding to this question. So we have a divided across all 4, which is also fair, because indeed all factors will play a role. But there's slightly more vote for consumer, so bottom-up approach. And I would like to also, our audience, if you agree, disagree, please raise your hand. I would like to hear from you later in the discussion time. of why do you think differently will be the most critical driving factor. So indeed, a integrated approach is important because technology is, in this case, is like this. It's like a train rolling over. The question is, what will government regulations playing catch up, or consumers responding to it, or farmers responding to this changing landscape? In the end, in order for everybody to benefit, we need a integrated approach. So please share your experience in your next session.
Okay, thank you. So yeah, when we talk about digital innovation, you could think of this type of machines. And I always say, well, it's very easy to put such a machine, in this case, in the orchard. But yeah, what do you do with it? And how do you create added value? And how is it going to help you, in this case, as a farmer, and maybe also in the perspective of the whole supply chain? So yeah, therefore we identified, or we developed an integrated approach to digital innovation. And we said that it is very important to work in so-called use case projects. Everybody knows the term use case, I think, but what do we exactly mean? Well, it means that you work in a real life environment, so in a real setting, not in a laboratory anymore, but really in the field, in real life. And it is important, as we found out in our projects, that all stakeholders are involved at all stages of the development cycle, which is about design, and then you're going to implement and test it and evaluate it, and then you go through this cycle again, evaluating what you designed, and maybe you have to adapt it. But as this spiral indicates, you go through it once and then twice, but each time you want to end up at a higher level, and that is driven by certain objectives you have to set, for example, to increase yields or to reduce your pesticide use, or want to create better transparency for consumers. And therefore, yeah, you are going each time, each cycle, you want to reach a next level, which then usually is called the minimum viable product, which is a version of your innovation that has just enough features to evaluate it. And it is more than just a technical prototype. It also includes aspects of these governance issues or these business modeling issues that have to be addressed. But ultimately, you want to end up from a minimum viable product to large-scale adoption, because then only then you can have a viable business model in the end. So around this use case, user testing. So do users need my app or my application in the end? And how can users use my app? These are leading questions to go through this cycle of developments. But you also need to tap into state-of-the-art knowledge from science, but also infrastructure is very important to look at, because it's usually also the basis for the digital innovation. And then I mean it can be hard infrastructure, with 5G or whatever future infrastructure, but also the whole architecture that is used to go from this hard infrastructure to applications. But there are also all kinds of laws and regulations coming up that are influencing somehow the outcome of your use case project. And it's also very important that this use case project is carried out in a safe and trusted environment where several stakeholders, usually a relatively small group, can learn also from the mistakes, and that their mistakes are not published right away. So that is also very important, that you can experiment in a real life setting, but in a safe environment. Also, when you want to share data, you can make agreements that for the time being, within this time frame of a use case project, you are sharing your data, and then see if it works, and then you can continue. But if it doesn't work, then you should also be able to stop that. And finally, it's also important that you are not operating within a isolated environment on an island, but that you also are able to learn from other use case projects that maybe are doing very similar things, so that you can also learn from that. Well, we translated this also into a kind of general approach that we said, okay, you have this use case project as the heart of a digital innovation approach, supported by these multiple disciplines, which are data science and information management on the one hand, and at the other hand, business modeling, governance, and ethics. They have to deliver certain knowledge and competences, and at the same time, you have to pay attention. How do you develop your whole ecosystem of players, large players, small players, and how do you scale that up? So yeah, I want to illustrate that with one of our use cases from the iOF 2020 project. And as is shown here, that was a very large scale pilot, 30 million euro funded by the European Commission. And we were able in the end to develop 33 use cases all over Europe and different sectors. So dairy, fruits, arable, vegetables, and meat. And also some of them were focusing on organic or an integrated farming approach. And it was all about, how can we accelerate this uptake of Internet of Things technology, in this case for the European farming and food sector. And yeah, so I cannot go into all use case projects. I would like to, but I'll take out one example, my favorite example of big wine optimization, which was one of these use cases. And they were focusing on sustainable wine production, wine quality management, and shipping monitoring. So it was not only focusing at the orchard, but also in the end towards the consumer. Because this was the ultimate aim. So how can we create a kind of sustainability footprint for each bottle of wine that is being produced? With, of course, then also the aim, how can we differentiate in the shop from other wines? And therefore, they defined 3 IoT products or services that should be developed: a wine sustainability tool focusing at the orchard, a wine quality control tool, which is more focusing on the cellar, and the wine shipping monitoring, and finally taking the bottle that goes to the consumer into account. And all this information, all these tools have to determine the sustainability footprint for each bottle. So I cannot again go into all these tools. By the way, it was a 4-year use case project. So yeah, I'm going to tell you in 5 minutes what is being done in 4 years. So I can only tell you and present you the highlights. But you have to take that into account that in reality it took quite some efforts and some time. But the challenges were that they were already applying some kind of precision agriculture, so they were dealing with huge amounts of data. It was time consuming to process them, and they wanted to make more real-time decisions, and not when the data was collected and then after a week or a month or maybe a year see what kind of decisions. No, how can we make more real-time decisions? So for these tools, the core feature, or for this wine sustainability tool, the core feature was to create a professional dashboard to monitor all this information and a single, easy to use interface. So this is how it worked in practice. So they put all kinds of sensors and devices also in the soil and in the orchard, as you can see, that produce data. From that dashboard were generated with typically all kind of management information that can be used to adjust your management practices in reality, and then you can measure again. And actually, so this is also this cyber physical management cycle that I showed in the very beginning. So you can measure and then see if you make progress dealing with these challenges that you set in the beginning. But this was not a one-time cycle, of course, as I explained in our method. So they were also going through several cycles, defining several minimum viable products. So, for example, they did it with all the stakeholders together. And that meant, for example, that they didn't have right away a nice dashboard, but they started to make a sketch of that. Maybe they decided also to put some extra sensors in the orchard, or also to introduce other management practice. So yeah, this is this learning cycle, and you have to imagine that you go through that several times, several iterations to come up with a product, a final innovation in the end. So let's very briefly then have a look at all these three blocks around this use case that we're supporting the use case project. So first have a look at data science and information management. So as I indicated, all kind of sensors were put in the orchard and the soil. They captured the data that had to be stored, had to be transferred and transformed, and finally analyzed. And that recently I also read again a nice article, and maybe you know it. The analysis in the end, of course, that you are after, but especially also these first steps from capturing to transformation usually takes most of the effort. It's about 80-20 rule. But yeah, then you want to transform these data into this dashboard with management information and try to transform that into actionable knowledge to adjust your management. So that was a whole world behind it, of course, and all kind of partners I will show you in a moment were involved to do this. But this is in a snapshot what data science and information management is about. Then looking at the ecosystem development. So at the start, actually before the project started, we asked for these use case projects to come up with ideas. So then there was this wine grower in the Bordeaux, Denis Dubourdieu, that wanted to do something with IoT, because actually the nice story is that their sons at school were connected with each other, and then they made also the connection between Denis Dubourdieu and ST Microelectronics. Maybe you know them. It's a very big semiconductor company and a leader in IoT components, as it says over here. But anyway, they were connected with each other, and then well, they knew about this call for this IOF 2020 project, and they said, well, maybe we can use some advanced sensing devices to improve your sustainability of your wine. But okay, they couldn't do it alone, they decided, but they approached, at that time, it was still a startup, Process to Wine, that were appointed to make a marketable product out of this. But Process to Wine, startup, small, also needed some additional partners for doing the analysis and all the processing of the data. So they involved also these partners. And finally, they also said, okay, we also need some partner to do more the communication and dissemination and to build the ecosystem. And then Vinidia was involved to do that. So this was set up at the beginning of the project, and they started to work together as a sub ecosystem for this use case. And then the business modeling, governance, and ethics part. So therefore, all the use cases had to develop a product fact sheet in which they basically set their KPIs. So in this case, they wanted to reduce production costs with 10%, monitoring time and pesticide use also to reduce that, and also making wrong decisions, diminish that by 10%. Then it was a very interesting exercise, and that was done several times, also with all the other use cases, price setting exercises. So as I said, with the Process to Wine was the one who was going to market this sustainability tool in the end. So they came up after some calculations that a wine grower had to pay 250 euros per year to retrieve the services for this particular wine sustainability tool. But yeah, then also Process to Wine had to see how they could also include in this price the contribution of the other partners. But you see some question marks over there. After 4 years, they still didn't finally sort out how to deal with that. So they are still in progress. And the same holds also for, well, what does it mean? The farmer has to pay, the wine grower has to pay this amount. So, okay, looking at the KPIs, maybe he has a return on this by having really the savings and production cost and pesticide use. But you could also think, yeah, should I also set a higher price on the wine? But also this question was in the end not yet fully addressed. But if you look at this price setting chain, there is also yeah, there are also all kind of, well, what we call data governance or governance questions in general. So in this new setting, this wine process to wine company has a potentially a strong position. So do they get access and control over all the data? Or can the wine growers say, okay, but I also want to use this data for other purposes? And is this tool available for all wine growers? Or does Vinidia said, no, we invested in that and now it's only for our own members? And if you look at ST Microelectronics, they stepped quite new in this market or in this area. So what would be their market position in the future? Are they becoming a big dominant player? I think that didn't happen yet, but that could happen in the future. And also all these researchers that were involved in this analyzing that had to deal with sustainability. Maybe they also had a kind of biased view on sustainability. So these are some questions that had to be addressed, and that's also actually what we did. But also here, we didn't come up with final solutions, but it was appreciated very much by all the different stakeholders in this use case to discuss about these questions. And I think at some points they came up with some solutions, but there are also still questions. So we did it for all 33 use case projects, and I could only show one. But the nice thing is also that putting all these use cases together in one big project, they were also able to learn from each other. For example, this price setting exercise, we did it with all of them. And you can imagine that, a lot of questions and solutions were not specific for one use case. So they could also learn from each other. And the same holds for the technical parts, for standards and all kind of other knowledge that had to be involved. So that's, I think, a big benefit if you set up these larger programs, these larger networks of different use cases so that they can also learn from each other. And they were supported, as I indicated, from these three different angles by, in reality, groups of people coming from different institutes, usually research institutes. And they also learned a lot, of course, throughout the years from all these different use cases, and they could, put together all the knowledge that they had, and also to disseminate that. And that's also actually what we did. But for example, we also built a whole reference architecture for using IoT components and what kind of standards do you have to use in between. And in the end, we called it minimum interoperability mechanisms, but maybe that's going into too much technical detail. But we also were very much involved, for example, in setting up the code of conduct for data sharing in agriculture. That was finally issued or published by Copa-Cogeca and CIMA and many other associations. But from this project, we made a significant contribution to that, I can say. And so that is also the benefit of having these use case projects together in one large project. So finally, if you are interested in this particular use case or maybe others, then you can still go to this use case catalog, which is now also being transferred to our new project that I will tell in the third part, Smart Agri Hubs. But the information is still available on the internet, and you can go there. So that was my second part.
Thank you, Shark. That was very also informative and honest, let's say, evaluation on the use cases. Of course, at the European level, this kind of research project are aimed to develop new knowledge. So, of course, a lot of topics, issues that is may not immediately applicable at the marketplace. For example, you already mentioned the issue of value distribution, and who benefit from the technology development, who pays for it. If consumers are not paying additional for the sustainability label, should be farmers paying for it if they do not see the value in improving their performance. So, and then in the end, the one clear winner in your case, in this wine case, is the technology company, because they see a future, the technology is inevitable, so they want to be securing that position early on. And that's actually a kind of feedback also from earlier sessions. We interviewed several sessions with leading companies like MOBA or Westford, that they are developing data product, not knowing exactly at this point who should be paying for it, but they do see in the midterm the technology is inevitable and they want to secure their leadership position. So that is a clear win in that sense. Mm-hmm. But the value distribution to consumers, to also other ecosystem players, not so easy to define, which leads to the third poll question. This is a question actually raised during our session with MOBA, looking at the egg chain, is what would you think is the most likely landscape for interconnecting, what your word is, interoperability between separate data platforms in the food industry? So that's also, Jacques, from your 30 user cases, looking at a variety of sectors in different European countries, with different kind of leading or driving forces. I'm also curious, what do you think about this question? What will be may not be the reasonable or logical, but what will be the most likely that will happen, that will be able to better solve this value distribution question? So what do you think, Jacques? This is still very posed to you first.
Yeah, this is, of course, you sent me the questions already in advance, and I think this was for me also the most difficult one to answer, because definitely also here, it's good to add this to this question, what is the most likely? But then still, I'm still doubting, and one answer I'm thinking about is actually not in this list. That is more a not so much a public platform, but a kind of common platform. So to make it a little bit more concrete, so within the IOF project, but also in the previous projects we did, we work a lot with FiWare, which came out of the Future Internet program of the European Commission, and there we built, or well, we were involved from the Agrifood side, but there were also many other domains involved, also from energy and smart cities and health. There they developed a kind of set of generic enablers. Because that's also the difficult thing with platform. What is exactly a platform? They also intended to create this platform, but in the end they thought, well, let's just develop a set of generic enablers on how can you organize security, privacy, and trust, for example, around platforms, and then we leave it to commercial implementations to do that. But if they use these generic enablers, they use certain standards, so that it is able or easier to create interoperability and reuse of data and information between these different platforms. So I think that kind of development of and I don't want to call it a platform, but as I think I mentioned it all earlier, we call it minimum interoperability mechanisms. I think that's much more important, that somehow is facilitated and stimulated. And then I think the government can have a role in that, but it's not the government itself that is going to set a platform. In the end, it should be commercial players that are building some kind of platform, but they should be stimulated, I would say, to use these common standards. And then, I think everybody can profit from that, and we have a level playing field. It's more easier to move from one platform to the other. That would be the ideal situation, I think.
But you think that's where the government should be playing a role in setting up this minimum framework requirement as yes, and then let the private sectors, the private standard sectors take their own initiative, innovation to build on it.
And it's not, of course, not only the government. So that actually also was the case with this FiWare platform. No, I don't call it a platform, with FiWare. And so there was a lot of, again, I think it was a 300 million euro program over 5 or 6 years. Investment from the European Commission, but also big ICT companies like Telefonica and Orange were investing in that, and they are still doing that. And now it's a foundation that is still driven by these industrial players, but it's a completely open platform. So also in the course of the program that was being established, a lot of these companies invested their money and time in it, but at the end, luckily, they decided together, well, let's put it in the open space as an open source component. Everybody can use these generic enablers. We can also do it ourselves, and maybe we have some advantage because we have some more knowledge about it, but everybody can use it. But also with the idea that if everybody starts to use the same generic enablers, then there will always be enough opportunities to create new applications, because then they nicely talk with each other. So then there is much more potential for all kind of different applications.
Right. So we also have a number of questions in the chat, but let's first, maybe Bianca, let's see the answer to the last poll question. Okay, again, diverse subscription model, government-driven, standardized food sector, but not per retailer, not retail-driven either. Does this answer surprise you, Jacques?
No, I'm not in that sense that you see that there is not a very clear winner, or somebody says, well, this is really the most important or the most likely. I think it's very difficult to say.
A subscription model seems to be basically let the multiple commercial integrators operate, but then build that minimum interoperability, basically.
I think
inline.
That's a little bit, you have to think about what is exactly meant by this, but it's a subscription model. But I think that mostly refers to the situation I described. So I can quite agree also with this result.
Okay. So actually today is a special day, the palindrome day. So the 2222. I actually over a few minutes will be at the 0222 as well. So I suggest that for remembering this special day, that we all turn on your cameras. Then Bianca can make a group photo for everybody. We can do it now, Bianca. You have to wait for the 0222.
I can do it now, but then I have to ask Jacques to stop sharing his screen.
Jacques, if you can stop for a minute, we can have everybody turn on your camera for gathering on this special day. So you gave the call to everybody look at the camera and smile.
Yeah, I don't see everyone, but let's go ahead with everyone who's there. Look at the camera, smile, and I will make the print screen. Yes, thank you.
Okay, thanks. So Jacques, let's continue with the last part. Basically, after your research project, you'll learn a lot. The question is, how will this large European project with hundreds of million investment go into shaping the future in terms of setting up this minimum requirement, level playing field, and how should this develop what EU is doing, which is very good in setting standard that can impact other regions of the world. For example, today we have also quite a number of participant registrants from Africa. Also other regions like China is also very much raising to set standards in this space as well. So how do we go forward? Also looking at a kind of international angle.
Yeah, so maybe I was also looking at the chat, and maybe I'll just answer the first question because it's just more a clarifying question, and I think the others will also come back in the discussion.
Yeah, we invite also our people to speak up their questions as well.
Yeah, but maybe the first is about this biased view on sustainability, is maybe to clarify it. But what I meant is that the sustainability, as most of you know, is in the end a quite complex subject. So what do you really understand about it? So some people tend to look only more at the planet aspect, while others look more at also the other aspects. And that can happen also when you have scientists involved. They are also just humans, so they also have their own view maybe on sustainability. And that can be also a biased view. and that in the end cannot be visible anymore in the analysis. So they will do a certain analysis with this bias, but yeah, you don't see that in the outcome anymore. So, well, this is just one of the questions that you could also raise about these ethics that I indicated in our approach. But there are also many other ethical questions. Oh, somebody is drawing on my screen. I don't know how that happened. But okay, let's continue. And then the other questions I think will come back.
Yeah.
Can I delete this? No. So if you look at the evolution of ICT in the agri-food sector, I draw this these axes. At the x-axis, the standalone applications to the complex level of systems that we call it nowadays, and at the y-axis, the process operator to the business ecosystem, looking at the number, but also especially the complexity of stakeholders that are involved. And then if you draw along these axes, you could say that you have on the one hand single apps that are addressing a single production process. You have farm information systems that look at farm management, chain information systems at the whole food supply chain. And I think now we arrived at the stage that the first data platforms are there, but only in the very beginning. And we are now talking about food systems. So not so much looking at the primary production alone, but look at the whole and how can we create a balanced way of food production and food systems. And what we are going to, I think, is that we want to create a food data economy that is much more driven by data, and that is based on data ecosystems, or in some other settings, I call it data spaces, which is now also coming up as a kind of new concept, but that I think is still in the future. So it's clearly going into this direction where you have, where we are at the edges of the both axes, the systems of systems, so difficult technical environments where interoperability and standardization play a key role, and on the other hand, complex business ecosystems of all kinds of players. And that's something I would like to highlight a little bit further into in this slide, what I sometimes call the battle for farming and food data. So it's a very complex and competitive environment, I would say. So you see the big tech players, and I just listed a few examples over here that are already into this for many years, I could say, maybe decades already, trying to gather a lot of data through their machineries at the farm, but also input suppliers. And Monsanto was one of the front runners, now taken over by Bayer, that is working on this. But at the same time, you saw gradually also some reactions from the farmers themselves that, ask themselves what is happening, what is being done with our data. And then, of course, the question is it their data? You can have a lot of discussion about that. But yeah, so for example, then you got joint data in the Netherlands, and AccoWeb was another initiative. Now it's called Farm Maps, which was more driven also by our own Wageningen University. But also at the food side, of course, many well-known names that are launching their own applications. I just put here API that I also use to do my shopping. But of course, they're collecting a lot of data through that. But also the processors try to do that with all kind of new technologies. But if you look at this picture, these are the usual suspects, so to say, the players that are there already for a long time. But you also see that driven or backed up by large tech players like IBM or SAP or Google, Amazon, that are looking at all kind of startup companies, innovative startups, and then see if they can acquire them as they are successful. And there are also already very nice examples like the Farmers Business Network I put here in the US that started in this way, but now became also already a big player. But at the other side, you could also distinguish more data startups that were supported by venture capitalists through AgFunder or Antara Capital, for example, And a nice example of that is Farm Mobile, who was collecting or is collecting data from farmers, and they also apply all kind of fancy blockchain technology, and they just try to sell the data in the name of the farmer, and then if they earn money with it, the farmer gets also a certain share from that. So that's another nice example what is happening. But yeah, what I want to indicate, there are a lot of players, old and new players, that are looking into this data. And it's a whole dynamic field. It's not changing from day to day, but yeah, it's going very, very fast, as you probably know. But yeah, one of the key problems I want to address now is that there is still a lot of fragmentation. So how can we connect all these different dots through good infrastructures at the one side, so that's x-axis, but also business ecosystems at this other axis that are addressing this innovation challenge. I said in the beginning that we can utilize the potential of digital data to address these grand challenges of sustainable food production. And well, just coming back as an example, also now this picture from IOF 2020, which was a nice project. At least I think it was a nice project, and we had all these use cases all over Europe. But yeah, as long as the project was alive, they were connected with each other. But now the project has ended in 2020. So yeah, now there is again a disconnection. And of course, some nice products came out of it. So I can tell you that this process to wine company is still there, and they are increasing their business. So that's fine. It's a nice result. But the innovation approach that I try to sketch is not supported through these use case projects anymore, and that's I think a pity. So now also different initiatives in Europe in this case do not know from each other, or it's difficult to know from each other what everybody is doing. And so there is still spatial fragmentation, and I think you can also see that at a global level. But at the same time, there's also something like financial fragmentation, and I will explain that by a figure. If you look at the innovation cycle or pathway from invention through concepts, prototypes, piloting, market expansion, you see generally that at the left side there is a lot of public money being involved. So public governments are funders that are investing in new technologies. So nowadays AI, for example, there's a lot of money going to AI research. At the other side, when it's getting closer to the market, there's a lot of innovation capital from the private side available, and I think it indicates that it is even much larger than the public support. But the interesting thing is that you can also add them up, and then you see that it is especially challenging in the middle. If you can add them together, there is a large innovation potential in terms of money, but it is usually not being used because it is very difficult to match these both types of funding. And that's what I called recently in my Mansholt lecture a few months ago, the twilight zone of digital innovation. So there you see that it is very difficult to continue. So what is happening a lot is that there is a lot of developments on fundamental new technologies, but then it's not yet mature enough that private investors are already willing to invest in it because it's still too risky. But the public innovation support is also diminishing, and this is exactly also what we try to address in IOF 2020 to focus on this middle part of this innovation cycle, because we saw that there it is that's where the real challenge is. But then you have to be able to combine these both types of funding, and that's what in IOF 2020, for example, still didn't do. So that's why we came up with our next idea, and that perfectly matched with the whole movement of what was called digital innovation hubs that was coming up in Europe. So we were able to write a project proposal for a new call from the European Commission, and we called the project Smart Agri Hubs in the end. So where we would like to bundle expertise from the regions, technology and business modeling together to stimulate this digital transformation. And the vision is that what we did at a European-wide level, we would like to move it more to the local level. And so this innovation approach that I showed, how can we support that, not from a central European project, but more at the local level by local digital innovation hubs that orchestrate stakeholders, they initiate and support innovation experiments, and I will explain that in a moment. But at the same time, remain also the power of the global network, or well, the European network at first instance, so that they are not doing that on an island, but they can be connected to the state-of-the-art knowledge, can learn from other innovations that are going on, and also get connected with networks of investors. And so the mission is, how can we connect the dots? And so with Smart Agri Hubs, we don't want to create another network, whatever, but how can we connect the things to each other, and then try to mitigate this fragmentation, spatial and financial, in the right way. So just some figures. So also Smart Agri Hubs will end this year, and we had a total budget of 20 million euros to do that. And to illustrate, based on the approach that I defined, where did we continue? Well, we are still convinced that working in this middle phase of innovation, this twilight zone, it's very important to use this approach that I defined and explained in the second part of my presentation, this lean and agile and multidisciplinary way of working in use case projects, supported, or well, we call them now innovation experiments. That was a new term within the context of digital innovation hubs, but it basically means the same. But we said, okay, we don't have a special project anymore in which they are facilitated from these different disciplines in the project itself, but they should be provided by a network of competence centers. So that's also what we try to set up, this network, so that these innovation experiments were still able to use the state-of-the-art knowledge and competences that they needed. And for the ecosystem development part, you could say, well, that's something in IOF 2020 that was very much centrally organized. But now we said, how can we transfer that more to the local digital innovation hubs? And therefore, we have this innovation service maturity model developed, which is a methodology to increase the maturity of these digital innovation hubs, also very much based on the experiences we gained in these projects like IOF 2020. And we put all these different elements together in the innovation portal that I will show in a moment. So there were, in the end, 5 basic concepts that make up Smart Agri Hubs. So the cornerstone, so to say, are the digital innovation hubs that are doing innovation experiments, and they are supported by competence centers. We have the innovation portal that brings everything together, and we support them to increase their maturity. And this comes together in a layered network of digital innovation hubs and competence centers, and that we also then organized in regional clusters, a kind of governance model that we also applied, but I won't go into that detail now. And I think it's important then also to tell a little bit about the digital innovation hub itself. So it's more a role. So there are different digital innovation hubs now we can identify, and none of them is exactly the same. So sometimes it's a large organization, also with an office somewhere, a building, but sometimes it's also more a virtual organization of just a few people. But it very much depends on the purpose they have. Do they want to serve only one particular sector, only the greenhouse or dairy, or are they looking more at technology or ICT in general, that kind of things. But the basis is that they orchestrate the digital innovation process by connecting the different players that you see over here in these different dots, and that they and no, not in the end, but they are initiating and facilitating new innovation experiments, also in a sustainable way, so that if one experiment or project stops, that they are able through their network, for example, with new investors, to have a follow-up of this innovation experiment, so that you have a continuation through this whole innovation development path that I showed previously. And it's still important that they can connect with other digital innovation hubs and with other competence centers, because sometimes a competence center can also be included in the digital innovation hub. That's also possible. So these are just to indicate different services. It's very important that they are not only delivering technology services, for example, technical support or doing testing and validation, but they also deliver business services. As I said, access to finance, to follow up after the project, but also ecosystem services to do community building or ecosystem learning or lobbying or whatever. But that's the basic three types of services that digital innovation hub should have. Well, this is then the snapshot of one of the elements of the innovation portal. We have a kind of map that you can click on, and then you can see where are the digital innovation hubs, where are the competence centers, where are innovation experiments taking place, and then you can drill down, so to say, and get more information. So we already set up a very nice network, I could say, of these digital innovation hubs, and we have also included the use cases from iOS 2020 now also in this innovation portal. And yeah, of course, it is not just something on itself. It is used. It should be used for matchmaking to generate new experiments through all kind of new funding, and that's also actually what we did through open calls. But just to show another snapshot, there is already a lot of training material available, and then you can see also at the top there are also other elements. So I invite you really to go to this innovation portal, or maybe you're already part of that, and look at it. But it still can be improved, I'm sure. But there is already a lot of information and useful knowledge out there. And yeah, as you can see, the map of the whole world is already in the background in this portal. But basically, the dots are in Europe. There are already some dots elsewhere in the world. And we have also already serious plans to see if we can go to Africa, to South America, and to India at least, and maybe other parts of the world can also be connected to this network. So we don't want to copy the network from Europe to other parts. No, we just want to see if we can extend it and then also create mutual relationships between the different dots on the whole world. So I don't go into all the details of this one, but we started with already a nice ecosystem, especially also a lot of SMEs were involved, and 140 digital innovation hubs in the beginning, in all member states at that time. But we want to attract another 260, and I think we're almost at the end. We almost reached that. So well, that was a good job, I think we did. So we had 28 flagship innovation experiments as a kind of leading examples for innovation experiments and different sectors again, as you can see. But I think the most important part is at the right side. So how can we create impact and how can we expand? So we had 6 million euros available for our open calls, but the explicit goal was also to attract new money with it. We wanted to establish at least 70 new innovation experiments with this money, but connect that with additional funding, especially also from the private side. And I don't know the exact figures now, but I think we didn't reach that yet. So that is still a challenge to go. But okay, we at least are trying it now. So I'm coming now to the overall conclusions of all the three parts. So I think you can say there is a clear potential in digitalization for sustainable food systems. But as I try to show, especially in the third part, there is still too much fragmentation. So coming back also to the questions we dealt with, I think still a lot to be improved if we can overcome this fragmentation. I showed how digital innovation should take place in a real life context by these use case projects following this multidisciplinary, collaborative and agile approach. And I hope that it's clear now how we do that. And I think it's also necessary that this digital innovation is driven by local digital innovation hubs that are empowered by this network of peer digital innovation hubs and competence centers. And that alignment of public and private funding instruments in the future is much needed. So almost there, but maybe yeah, you are very enthusiastic about this. So if you want to learn more about it, we have an online course. It was a regular course by Wageningen Academy, usually done in Wageningen with a group of people for a couple of days. But yeah, because of the crisis, of course, we had to turn it into an online course. But actually, that also meant that yeah, we could go much more in depth and learn much more about this topic. So yeah, you're very much invited to see if you can join this. We are starting a new cycle on the 25th of April, as you can see. So if you want to register for that, you're welcome and go to this website. And yeah, maybe after this discussion today, we can also think of a dedicated version. If some people say, well, we really want to go for the challenges that I presented, we could also think of, we can set up a kind of dedicated version of this course that, yeah, we have a dedicated group of people that want to go for, yeah, this creating this network of digital innovation hubs, or whatever we will call it, and how we can connect the different dots, maybe at the global level together. So with that, for this part, I want to thank you for your attention, and I think we can still have some discussion. Tiffany.
Thanks, Shark. So to get some main points from your feedback from your presentation, the European level public funded projects are coming to an end, basically. They had an important role in pioneering into especially research, data, setting up the conceptual framework, and preparing this whole infrastructure, let's say, in the understanding. The next step is how do we bring in the private sector in before it becomes a full-fledged business model. So this twilight zone, it's a challenge, but same time you look at the disruptive digital spaces that because the cycling for business models become much shorter. So venture capitalists, the big money, actually are looking for what will become the next unicorn, let's say. So if 1 out of 10 project, 9 fail, if that one succeeds, that will mean a big gain, for example. So that this twilight zone is actually a lot of opportunities, because this undefined space, the new development, new technology, new regulations. But as I think in terms of the next stage, is certainly a lot of gaps can be filled in bridging the different driving forces. And also you mentioned this connecting the dots. It's also the goal when we set up Digital Food, this forum, is to connect internationally. We have interesting participants so far from all around the world. And I was just chatting with Derek Bakker. He's calling in from Australia. I understand it's very late now. It's very early or very late for him. He's staying up to join this session, which he thinks very worthwhile. So Derek, maybe just to ask you first, what makes you decide to stay up with us? Why is this relevant to you? If you can turn on your, yeah.
Well,
hi.
Greetings, everybody. So it's a common misunderstanding that Australia is a long way away from everywhere. The truth is actually everywhere else is a long way away from Australia. So that's just the reality we face. But thanks for having me on board. I really enjoyed the presentation. Just very quickly, yeah, I'm an agricultural economist, and I work quite a lot on data applications in the Australian food system. Big emphasis here these days on value addition. As always, Australia is trying to move out of a commodity market for most of its products, and there's some success in that area. But secondly, of course, we're talking a lot about resilience these days in Australia after our bushfires and floods and mouse plagues and grasshopper plagues, and they've got a biblical list of problems that Australia's faced recently. Just a couple of quick comments. Once again, I've enjoyed seeing what's there. Much of it gels with what we're doing here. That fragmentation that Jacques was talking about is very much a feature of what we've got in Australia. There's a lot of cool data stuff going on within individual firms or even within individual processes for those firms, but we're really seeing a breakdown in terms of the supply chain. We're seeing a lot of data that gets collected and then dumped, and then someone else collects the same data and that gets dumped, and so on. We're seeing a lot of that kind of thing. In terms of hubs, yeah, we're seeing a drive towards sort of one-stop shops for this kind of assistance in Australia, but we don't have the funding models that are there in the European Union. I lived 20 years in the EU, so I know a little bit about the funding models. We don't have that kind of thing in Australia. Most of it has to be producer funded in some way, and that's a real riddle that we're working on. Just as Jacques was saying there, where do the costs and benefits flow? How do you get these things paid for? And there's something, that's really got to be really hardwired into what we're doing here on this kind of development. I'll stop there. Thanks very much for having me, everyone.
Thanks, Derek, for the comment, and hope you have a good night later. So, Jacques, do you have some response or other participant as well?
No, I would really like to give the floor. So, Derek, thank you very much for your comments, but you didn't have a very specific question. So maybe other people have a burning question, or
yes,
we want to add something. That's also welcome, of course.
We have earlier New America. Maybe you can, if you're still here, you can explain your comments and turn your microphone. I guess is New still here? Okay. Oh, okay. Hello.
Good afternoon. Yes, my comment was after Jacques observed that there should be some facilitating measures or standards to help implementation of these innovations or sustain the innovation process. And I gave as an example ITSA, the data spaces architecture, because that's exactly what they are doing for creating data spaces and sharing data. So it's a very specific area, but maybe, yeah, this is something to learn from. So some standards like that also could be established within the ecosystem of agri and food. And to my knowledge, in Germany, they are implementing also the Gaia X for agri-food. So Jacques maybe knows that. So yeah, they started with it.
Actually, I know a lot about it because we just submitted a new proposal for the European agricultural data space, which unites more or less all these different groups that are working on it, including ITSA, Gaia X, but also Fireware that I mentioned. So we're trying to build upon that. And yeah, as I already indicated, I think this is a good thing that is happening already for quite a while in Europe, that they are investing in that. And it's a good example also, as I indicated, of a nice public-private collaboration in that sense. But yeah, I think it's not easy, but it's relatively easy to look at these technical integration and these architectures that has to take place. I think the more, let's say, I don't know if you have to call it the soft side of innovation. Yeah, it seems to be more difficult to organize. So how can you also create similar frameworks then for responsible data sharing? So these governance aspects. But also, how do you maintain and build this ecosystem? Okay, I think I showed that we have quite some ideas about that, but it's much more difficult to organize that in an appropriate way. That's my experience so far.
Yes, I agree with you. So it is also not those issues are not all addressed, but it moves in the right direction. So also the commercial parties move in, they implement certain parts and offer them to the ecosystem. So these are, let's say, positive developments. Hopefully, we'll also move into the agri-food.
Thanks, Noor.
Thank you.
Dick, you had a comment about the role of European government. Indeed, because the ecosystem, it is the most critical topic, and it varies by country, by sectors. So somewhere, and then at the European level at least, then eventually internationally, the government need to play a role in to shape this basic level of requirement, like, for example. Dick?
Yeah, well, my question was, does government, I think Sjaak's solution is the right one. You need a universal infrastructure. So who's building it? It's nobody's problem. So it should be government's problem. It's our public interest. But does government understand? Sjaak, I see you're doubting on this, on that. No, to start it, I mean, otherwise it won't start. It'll start from an interest, and an interest leads to Google or Facebook. And if you want if you don't want that, you have to do it the other way around. But there is this other thing. There is this big question going around now in due diligence in Europe on carbon. So you have to do your reporting on carbon. And yet, if you talk to people who know about carbon, they'll say it's the least well-defined parameter there is. And it's all political. So this is what governments have to understand. You need the real expertise and the real cool expertise, and you have the agnostic framework. But sorry, I start again. You need an agnostic political, technological infrastructure. So it has to be started by government, as you said. And then on the other hand, you have the political side. How do we decide what a carbon credit is? And actually, government shouldn't be implied in defining what that is. It should be a real political process. Do you get what I mean? Because every decision on what is sustainable is a political one, as you said, starting out. And that was Annemarie van Vilstrum's question, I think.
Yeah, so it also comes back to what I illustrated or indicated in the beginning, that now governments still have their own kind of information systems and also their own definitions, most probably behind it. But I think in the future, this has to merge with each other. So around the same data, but also not only the data, but also the definitions. For example, concerning sustainability, or more specifically carbon footprints and that kind of things. And I think at least at the European level, and so as I said, I just was involved in submitting this proposal for data spaces, which clearly indicated, so the call was public, everybody could read that. They were very explicitly referring to that these data spaces should not only serve private purposes, only the economic performance, but also these type of indicators should be included, also data for the common good, but also for these more sustainability purposes. So I think there is a real challenge. How can you combine different purposes, different objectives, can be policy objectives, but also more private objectives. How can you combine them together in one ecosystem? I think in the end, around the same data.
Thank you.
Sjaak, that you mentioned ambition. Also, the goal is to connect the approach of digital innovation hubs to other regions. We already mentioned Africa, and indeed, a lot of innovations which you see now, it's happening from developing countries, and because you can jump directly to the top of the innovation pyramid. We have in the past series a lot of African participants. We have here today, I think, Khalid Sharif. He's from the Kiwa Sustainable Food Production Network. If he's still there, Khalid, would you like to?
Hi everyone.
Yes.
Yes, Kiwa is a startup. We are in the food production. Actually, we use a technology very similar to aquaponics, but mainly suits our North African environment. We mainly use sand as growing media for our vegetables. The main technology is based on integration between aquaculture and vegetable culture. And this is what Kiwa is based on. And actually, we also integrated in some Internet of Things, gathering some parameters from our environment, humidity, temperature, all this kind of stuff. And also recently, we have been talking about integrating some AI or computer vision monitoring of crops. And this can be a huge data source for our operations. It's still in its basics, at the beginnings. But this is what got me in this interested in this series of meetings, and I guess so we can be. I'll check how we can get in this innovation hubs. Maybe we can benefit from our experiences. Also, I myself is IT background. I'm a software developer, but also interested in facing the world problem of food production and sustainable food production. This is what got me in the field. So it's my first time here. So I hope we can get some collaboration in Africa with your network, and this will be a great chance.
Thanks, Khalid.
You're welcome.
Sjaak.
Yeah, you're also very welcome. And indeed, the innovation portal I showed of Smart Agri Hubs is also open. You saw already there are some dots in Africa, actually. So there is some registration process that you can go through, but it's very, there is a low entrance. But yeah, I think what you said is really true. So the whole concept of Smart Agri Hubs now is that we say you have to organize it and you have to lead it at a local level. But what I try to indicate is that we gained a lot of experience in how to organize, the digital innovation process, and we have valuable experiences, but also concrete tools to support these innovation experiments. We have also tools to work on these business models, for example, and that is now being conveyed to these competence centers network. We also not everybody can just become a competence center within Smart Agri Hubs. You also have to register, but also go through some procedure in which you indicate what are your competences, how can you help digital innovation, in what way. But so that's also something we can offer. But the main message is it has to be led and to be organized at the local level by the local players in their own context. But still, many things you can learn from each other. There's a lot of generic knowledge that you can also transfer from one region to the other. And that would be really a pity if that, it has to be invented every time at each place and in each situation again.
Yeah. Okay. I'll check the registration process and see if we can get into this. Of course, when you talk Africa or other countries outside the Western world, you face another challenges because, like for example, me myself, we lack the experiences for a lot of clean and organic practices in agriculture. I know it's a way of out of the topic, but also some issues like sourcing the sensors and the IT infrastructure. This is not as in Europe. and these are challenges we are facing. Also, access to maker spaces and innovation hubs in agriculture. Also, funding in agri innovation and these type of things. It's we lack this in, like for example, Egypt here, and even the potential for investment is mainly concentrated on other sectors away from agriculture. It's all about going for retail businesses and fintech and all this fast money or fast growth. As you mentioned, even in the use cases that you worked with, it lasts for like 6 years or so, maybe more, and it's still fragmented, and maybe it's in infancy process, and it's still people don't know what will get or what they will reach. So it's nobody here in the Africa or Egypt is interested in such projects. It's very long-term projects. Nobody would invest, or even the government. I guess the European policies will cascade to African countries, because you have to be sustainable farming practices, and this will not come through our governments, So it has to be obligatory from the Europeans or the US to support, or the policies had to match the Europeans or the export markets.
Yes, thanks, Khalid. Indeed, that's to connect and there is value in connection. First, just even to understand and define the problems, and also learning. So in the coming, we are coming to an end of today's session. And in the coming month, we will have each month featuring a use case, bringing in this private sector players to look at different aspects where Sjaak outlined, and how do the private businesses are addressing these issues of value creation, value distribution, and data policy. So I thank you everybody for joining today, and I hope to see you in a month.